Okay, I already asked how many people read the book. A few people have. Something I discovered really early on when doing this talk, which I've done a few times. I change it every time, so don't worry. It's not the same old talk I'm always doing, because otherwise I get bored too. But something that I say before I do this talk is that people think that I've seen the book listed under UFO skepticism. Well, I suppose it could be considered UFO skepticism, but the thing is, the point, apart from the fact that it's a fascinating story, was that I'm real interested in the UFO subject. If you read my blog at UFO Mystic that I do with Nick Redfern, you know that I'm not some kind of what I call a fundamentalist skeptic. Skeptics are fine. Fundamentalist skeptics is what I don't really like. People that kind of made up their mind before they look at something. And I'm talking about fundamentalist skeptics and believers too, because I don't really consider myself either. I just want to look at a body of evidence and try and decide for myself. So the point of the book in this lecture is to find out what things aren't, so that we can concentrate possibly on what things are to do with UFOs. And if you go to the blog, you can see the 8 zillion things that I think it might be. I don't think it's any one thing, and it can't be explained by one thing. However, in this story, in my book Project Beta, a lot of things were explained to my satisfaction, because I talked to people on the inside and people from the UFO research community about aspects of the story, and if the stories matched up pretty well, then I would consider it explained, because somebody would say, I didn't know what that was. Could have been, you know, anything, and then somebody inside the government says, well, we were flying stuff at that point, so either they're trying to cover it up, or it was a, you know, it was some kind of experimental craft. Anyway. Paul Bennewitz, if you don't know who he is, he's now deceased. He died in June of 2003, coincidentally about a week before I came out to start doing, or no, it was in 2003. Might have been 2 or 1, but anyway, a week before I came out here to start doing research on the book, I found out that he had died. And, oh, you know who I found it out from? I went to Thunder Scientific, which is his company. I'm ahead of myself a little bit. And I went to his son, I think it was Matthew Bennewitz, and I went into the office and I called for him. They brought him out to the front, and I said, I wanted to ask you a question, but I don't want to do it out here because I didn't want to do it in front of his employees. So he said, okay, come on. We went to an office. And he said, I said, I'm doing a story about what happened to your father in the late 70s and 1980s. And before I could finish the sentence, he said, no, we don't want to have anything to do with it. And my father died last week. He kind of hustled me out of the office. And at that point, I kind of didn't want to do the book. But I recovered and I finished it. Paul Bennewitz started and owned a company which still exists called Thunder Scientific. They make humidity and temperature regulation instruments for real important clients like U.S. Navy, the Air Force, I think, and NASA definitely. Actually, at one point, he was trying to get clearance to sell things to the Russian military, but obviously the U.S. government wouldn't let him do it. This was the late 1970s. He was married. He had 2 sons, I believe. Maybe it was 3. This is really bad. 2 sons at least. We can find out at the end when I show the obituary. And he was doing pretty well with his business, but he was very interested in the UFO subject. That was his only hobby, really. He was basically kind of an electronics geek, and in the late 70s, he did things like build his own computers, because you can just go out and buy a computer. He'd buy his own computer and do his own software. He was very good at it. He had masters in electrical physics, electrical engineering, I believe, electrical physics, one of the two, and he had started this company and it was doing pretty well, but he had this interest in UFOs. The company did so well, and if any of you know Albuquerque area, 4 Hills is an exclusive, very expensive homes type area with a golf course in the middle of it, country club, and that's their home. I have a clearer picture of it, but I think I obtained it by not so legal means, because there's no trespassing sign there. I didn't take this picture, so I'm using it. That's the sign for Thunder Scientific. It's right off Wyoming Boulevard in Albuquerque. If you notice down here, that's the Wyoming gate for, it says Wyoming gate, I think, there for Kirtland Air Force Base, which I will get to in a minute. There's a warning sign there saying, you know, you must have permission from the base commander, et cetera, et cetera. Thunder Scientific's about it, blocked that way. So, Kirtland Air Force Base is a very big facility that's located on in the southwestern or southeastern part edge of Albuquerque and extends way down this way. This is Albuquerque up in here. That's the airport, International Airport. Just to give you an idea of what's going on and way things relate spatially to each other. That house I just showed you is right about here. This is the Four Hills area. This is north. The 40 goes along right up here, either there or right above it. This all is Kirtland Air Force Base. It extends off the bottom of here. This is Manzano Mountain, which I will talk about here in a minute. Back here is a facility for Sandia Labs, which does defense work, black projects, things like that. That's the golf course on the base. What happened was that Bennewitz, this is basically the view from the Four Hills area right near his house. There's the airport runway right there that I just showed you from the satellite picture. There's a fence going all the way, that's Manzano Mountain that I showed you before from, you know, up and looked at from the northwest. There's the warning sign, you know, do not trespass, you must have permission. I don't know if it says deadly force authorized, but so that was Paul Bennewitz's view. I will tell you a little bit about Manzano Mountain. In 1947, right after the war, the atomic weapons program was heating up. It was very important to keep this stuff hidden and inaccessible and not visible to the general public and other people. They didn't want looking at it. So they started hollowing out this mountain that I just showed you, Manzano. The project was presided over by Leslie Groves, who also ran the Manhattan Project. That's just another one to show you that it was no secret that they were digging this big facility to store nuclear weapons, and I think there might even been big enough to store airplanes, but all underground. That's another view a little bit further on. But what happened was that Paul Bennewitz would go out on his porch late at night, and he would see these lights sitting on the ground, like right out about in here, maybe a half mile or a mile away. The mountain's about, I don't know, mile and a half, 2 miles away, maybe from Bennewitz's house back here. He would see these lights sitting on the ground, and somebody told me recently he actually saw people walking around the lights with flashlights checking things out, and the lights would lift up like this. Not that quickly, just kind of lift up like this, hover there for a while, then fly around the backside of this mountain, then drop down behind there and disappear. And they did this over and over and over again. This is a little bit out of sequence. This is something new that I discovered a couple weeks ago. If you go on Google Earth, you can see a lot of the Kirtland Air Force Base on it. I didn't realize this until I started playing with it. But those are some of the entrances. This is behind the mountain. Bennewitz's house is up this way. These are entrances that go underground, all these little entrances. There's more of them. Bip, 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 all those. They go inside the mountain and in here and down and who knows where. That's Bennewitz's house to show you. He was up in this direction, so he was actually on top of a hill and he could look out this direction towards that fence I just showed you runs along right here. This is another view from further up the hill from his house. What this here is a triple electrified fence. There's 3 fences, and if you don't get electrocuted by one, you got 2 more to get over or under. Actually, somebody told me they had found people electrocuted and dead there a couple of times that tried to break in. I don't know what they thought they were doing. This fence goes all the way around the base of that mountain I showed you, with all the entrances underground. Very heavily fortified. This is another facility at Kirtland called the Starfire Optical Range, which I will get into a little bit later. It figures heavily in the story, which I did not know when I started the book. This is interesting. That thing I showed you, that little area behind the mountain I said was Sandia Labs. Everybody here know who Bill Moore is? Well, he was a UFO researcher. And he made sort of a deal with government intelligence to provide information about UFO researchers. Basically what they thought, what they were thinking, what they had knowledge of, because they wanted to know if they knew anything that they weren't supposed to about defense. You can be paranoid and say they wanted to know about UFOs, but I think the government people know a lot more about what they need to know about UFOs than asking UFO researchers. Maybe not, I don't know. But because of this relationship Moore had, which I will get into a little bit later, he was driven around the Kirtland Air Force Base facility. This was in 1981 or so, before people even really knew what was going on there. Very few people did. And he was told to take a picture of that facility, and he did. He asked why, and he said, and the guy with him said, "Don't worry about it. Just take a picture and tell me what you see later." And he developed the picture, and these are a bunch of buildings. You can sort of see outlines here. Somehow they've painted or done something with the buildings that keeps it from registering on film or digital or anything. You can't take a picture of it. You can see it, but you can't take a picture of it. This is the kind of things that are going on at this base. That's another one from Google Earth, even from a satellite. These are all a big cluster of buildings and garages and storage facilities, but when I zoomed in on them, you can sort of see things here, but I think those are plants. But if you zoom in on it, it's just a big white blur. So you can't really see anything. There's a lot of things you can see, but you can't see that still. The reason that Paul Bennewitz got interested in what was going on at Kirtland and later at Dulce, New Mexico, which you've heard of and which I will talk about later, was an abduction case that he'd heard about. He was involved he was interested in the cattle mutilation phenomenon. He had met another researcher, actually a state police officer, Gabe Valdez, at a cattle mutilation conference that was called by this New Mexico state senator. About a year after that, the New Mexico State Police got a call from a woman that said that she had seen some strange lights and wasn't sure, but she thought that she had gotten home a lot later than she should have. This was in the far northeast part of the state near Cimarron, Eagle's Nest, places like that, if you know the state, but remote northeastern part of New Mexico. They were actually, her and her son were coming back from a family gathering or something like that, something to do with her family in Oklahoma, Panhandle, which tells you how far northeastern part of the state it is. They were driving back. She said they saw these two big lights floating over a field, probably around midnight, and remember this was 1970, did I say 1979 or 80? It's 1980. Right after Bud Hopkins' book. When did that come out? 79, Missing Time? Does anybody remember? It was 79 or 80, but the abduction thing was not as big of a deal as it became later. So there wasn't really any kind of, idea that people had. People get picked up, they get taken on a ship, they get examined, all this. But she had a lot of these things in her story. Not at first. She was regressed by Leo Sprinkle, which I will get into as well. But she said she had seen something like this in some kind of underground facility. Krista Tilton drew this, and the woman that had the abduction experience, as far as I know, never drew any pictures of it. But this is the kind of stuff she described. She said she went through an underground facility. It was in the northern part of the state somewhere, and it's funny. I was reading the transcript, and right in the middle of the transcript, for no reason at all, she says, "Where's Roswell, New Mexico?" And the guy didn't ask her about it or say anything, but she came up with that, and he never pursued it. And I don't know why she said it, and I don't know why it even came into her mind. But later, somebody figured out there might be some sort of underground facility down in this part of the state. I do not know. I don't even know if there's one in Dulce. I have a feeling that there wasn't or isn't, contrary to what a lot of people think. But she said she saw these tanks there, and she was led through these underground facilities by, I guess, aliens. But she did not know what to do. The state police didn't know what to do, but this man, Gabe Valdez, who some of you may have heard of, knew about Paul Bennewitz and said, "Well, why don't you go down and see this guy? He might be able to help you." So a state police officer actually drove this woman, Myrna Hansen, and her son all the way from Eagle's Nest. Wonder why they can't turn that off in here. Eagle's Nest all the way down to Albuquerque, and dropped her and her son off at Bennewitz's house. So about a couple of weeks after the abduction experience, or whatever it was, this guy Leo Sprinkle, who had been researching UFOs and actually had worked with Travis Walton. No, that was James Harder. But he had done a lot of regressions way back when people didn't know what a regression was for an abduction experience. And he met Bennewitz at the house, met with Myrna Hansen, and started doing regressions with her. And the story about these tanks and apparently seeing a cow sucked up into on some kind of a beam, all kinds of weird stories like this. True, I do not know, but that's what she said to Leo Sprinkle when they were doing these regressions. After they had done a few of these, Paul Bennewitz wrote a letter to the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. I don't know if he was a member, but he knew the people there, Coral and Jim Lorenzen. What's strange about this case is that about the second time that Leo Sprinkle came down, about a month later in June, he said that Paul Bennewitz came to the door with a rifle and a pistol on his hip and said, "Get in, the aliens are going to see what we're doing." And he had become very paranoid. And this woman had been living at his house the whole time, and Lord knows what he told her. So Dr. Sprinkle tried to regress her again, but he said that she had been made so paranoid and so confused by what Paul had been telling her, and who knows where he got his ideas, I haven't been able to figure that out, that he didn't want to work with her anymore, because he said, this case is too contaminated. I don't want to make it any worse by regressing her and confusing her. So he left, and apparently Bennewitz got in touch with Dr. James Harder, who was the man that did the regressions with Travis Walton in 1975 or 76 when that abduction episode happened. What's strange is apparently Harder listened to Paul Bennewitz, and Bennewitz said, "I know how to keep the aliens from controlling the regression session," which is, they did things like put her in a car and cover the windows with tin foil and ground the car to the house plumbing system, and they went into hospitals and shielded x-ray rooms and all this, and he for some reason seemed to think that aliens or whatever they were controlling her mind and not letting her say what she should have been saying, what the real experience was. Where he got this idea, I do not know, but in my estimation, it contaminated her subconscious to the point where whatever happened to her, they never would have been able to find out what it was, unfortunately. But I mention this to show that Bennewitz had some very strange ideas very early on and was very insistent about them. He wrote letters like this. These are basically instructions about how to regress abductees, and nobody does this now, but early on here, Bennewitz thought that, they even did things like holding an umbrella over her with aluminum foil on it. So it got very crazy. At the same time, as I mentioned before, he was seeing these lights lift up off of the ground. You remember the satellite picture I showed? This is a map of Kirtland Air Force Base that I got through various means. Actually, Bill gave it to me. This area where I showed you about a mile away from his home up here is where these lights lifted up, and they'd fly around the back here and land somewhere back in here. Actually, this is wrong, which I found out by looking on Google Earth. The Starfile optical range is back here, which becomes important later. The funny thing about these UFOs that Bennewitz was seeing that were doing very, slow and not so complicated movements was that there were other things flying around in 1980 at Kirtland Air Force Base. And we know this because there was a report made, which was released later to UFO researchers, about a couple of guards who were on duty at about 1 in the morning. What day did I say that was? May of 1980? Yeah, August, thank you, of 1980. And they saw these lights come flying in from the north. They were about right here going on this road that goes, this is that triple electrified fence, but there's also a road right next to it. They saw these things fly in, or a light fly in, fly over to this area and drop down to the ground. So they called security and said, we're going to go check something out. And they went driving down this road out over to here. Actually, that says AEC installation, Atomic Energy Commission, which makes sense because this is all atomic weaponry. Something landed down here, and one of the guards got out of his truck, walked towards it with his flashlight on and his gun drawn. He radioed what he was doing, and he said when he got within a few feet of the object, his flashlight went out, and the thing just rose up and took off straight up. Since these are guards on a federal, on an Air Force base and a facility with lots of secret projects going on, it was taken very seriously, and a report was made. You probably can't see this, but it's got the names of the people that made the report, what they observed, basically what I just told you. The guy, he stated the object was not a helicopter, and that's the reporting officer, Richard Doty, who I will talk about soon. Another strange thing that happened in August of 1980, as if this wasn't enough, was that on August 13th, all the radar in the Albuquerque area went out for about 4 hours. The civilian radar, the Albuquerque International Airport, the Sunport, military radar, everything just shut down, wouldn't work anymore. And nobody could explain why. The people on the base said, we aren't doing it, it's not one of ours. Why don't you check this out? And this is the internal report on the radar jamming. And just so you don't think this is some sort of disinformation, actually, Bill Moore went to the Albuquerque control tower about, a few months after this and asked to see their logbook. And sure enough, there it was in all the logbooks, radar gone, we don't know why. About 4 hours later, bam, it all came back on. Started working again. I've asked around about this. They seem to think there was some sort of radar jamming thing being tested. And it just happened to knock out all the radar, including the military's radar. But nobody wanted to take responsibility for it. At least they knew it worked. Okay. Oh, I shouldn't have jumped ahead of myself. I asked around, what were these things that were flying around? They weren't doing anything actually that strange, but because of Bennewitz's his mindset, he thought, well, there's UFOs flying around the base. I don't know why there's men walking around with flashlights, but there's something strange going on the base, in full view of him and everybody else that lived in the Fort Hills community. However, this was in the middle of the winter when it was, below freezing outside. Most people didn't walk out on their porches, for the night air at 1 in the morning. Bennewitz did. I asked around and I said, what could this stuff have been? So it was hinted to me by various people that in the military that these are some sort of surveillance vehicles. It was also hinted to me that there might be anti-gravity type things, but the way these things were moving, they didn't need to be anti-gravity. They just raise up slowly, then fly. They were two of them, I think, a lot of the time. They just went at the same time together around the back of the mountain and dropped. What I thought, maybe, was that they were testing unmanned aerial vehicles, surveillance vehicles like this one, which probably a lot of you have seen. Something like this, very small. I mean, back in 1979 and 1980, no one knew about these things, and they were still being tested, and maybe they had some lights on them, I do not know. Or maybe it was some kind of weird anti-gravity craft. I have no idea about that either. But I'm fairly certain that the people at Kirtland knew what the things were. They didn't think they were some kind of alien craft from outer space because they were there all the time and they saw them and there were people walking around them. So this was one of the suggestions put to me, that it was unmanned aerial vehicles. That's one of my favorite ones. It looks very strange, and you might not think, they have two counter-rotating blades, and it flies. I think that's at Fort Huachuca in southern Arizona, where they test a lot of this stuff. But I think in the early 80s, they were also testing this stuff at Kirtland up here near Albuquerque. The reason I'm slightly confused is this is what Bennewitz said he took a picture of. Now, I don't know what this blue thing is. There are reports when maybe anti-gravity type vehicles are being used and it creates a blue ionization. It could be that. It could also be that the lenses were bad and it just made it look like that. At a point of light will just be, the lens will make aberrations and make it look like that. But this is actually a still from a frame of 8mm film that Paul took of these lights going up. He took lots of films of them. That's very strange. It's a picture he took of a PSA airliner coming into land at Albuquerque Airport. Nobody's been able to figure out what that thing is. Could be something on the lens. It looks like could be something round with the sun shining on it here, which makes sense. The sun's shining on this side.
Looks like a helicopter to me.
Oh yeah, could be.
Could be the back quarter of a helicopter.
Uh-huh.
From below.
Or maybe it's some sort of wing.
I'm thinking that the long thing's the tip.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be.
Uh-huh. You could be right. Looks very strange though. Just goes to show you, when you look at a lot of UFO and photographs of Bigfoot and all these things, I mean, what your preconception is going to determine what you see, almost always. And in Bennewitz's case, everything he saw was a UFO from another planet operated by aliens. This was a problem of his, and was actually used against him. Do you know about the Cash Landrum case? A lot of people, I'm sure, here know about it. Two women were driving home in Texas at night on December 29th.
One of the women's son with them too?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Betty Cash, Vicky Landrum, and Colby Landrum. And they saw this thing flying over the trees, and it came over the highway and shot this flame out the bottom. And one of the women got out to take a look at it. It was so hot she had to jump back in the car later. It was found out that these women had all kinds of symptoms of radiation sickness. One of them got cancer. One of her hair fell out. The thing was that when the thing was floating over the highway, very soon after they saw it, a bunch of helicopters came, Army helicopters, and kind of surrounded it while it worked out whatever it needed to do, and it flew off. And this is, December of the same year of all this other stuff was going on. I just include this to show you that this was most certainly something that was built by humans and was being tested. The thing was, after it got a certain distance off the ground, that rocket thing stopped. Something else took over and it kept it in the air. There's a bunch of stuff in the book. I've got part of a chapter about anti-gravity. People have done research into it and trying to figure out how far along we are in it. Some people think we've achieved it, but we also have to remember 10 or 20 years ahead of, technology is 10 or 20 years ahead of where we think it is. And for something like this, I don't know how far it is ahead or if we'd ever find out about it unless, the public absolutely had to know. I mean, if you had conquered gravity without using wings, or lighter than air or anything like that, I don't think you'd let anybody know that unless it was absolutely necessary. So what was being tested near Bennewitz's place might have been something like this. Not as elaborate, but maybe the same thing. I do not know. This is where I speculate. Speculation is fun. The reason Bennewitz was interested in the Dulce area, which is in the northwestern corner of New Mexico, is that Myrna Hansen had said during her hypnotic regression had made some reference to that area of the state. I don't know if she named Dulce by specifically as a geographic location, but that's why Bennewitz had this idea that something was going on up there. Something had been going on up there. It was one of the centers of the cattle mutilation phenomenon since the late 70s. And the main guy up there everybody talked to, small rural community, there's the obligatory cattle mutilation picture, was Gabe Valdez. He was one of the first people to go out and see these things, try and figure out what's going on, and basically say this is not predators, this is not natural deaths, a lot of them. Some of them are truly strange, unexplained. Most people here know about cattle mutilation stuff and the features of them, so I'm not going to go into it. Suffice it to say that a lot of strange stuff was going on in the area at the time. A lot of lights flying over the hills, a lot of, and the cattle mutilation stuff. If people choose to make a connection between the two, that's their business. The funny thing about it is a few times when he went out to look at these things where these cattle had been, he found things in the field near these mutilated cattle, like a gas mask. These are things that he gave me these images. Another thing he found out in the middle of a field where there was a mutilated cow was a bunch of this stuff that looked like radar chaff. It might have been little strips of metal that are shot out of planes when they have a missile shot at them, so that the radar on the missile follows the chaff and gets confused and doesn't hit the plane. But he also found all these little paper envelopes that had some of this stuff in them, like somebody had thrown the stuff out of a plane and had not quite ejected properly. He also said that some of this stuff was stuffed in the mouth of the cow. Why, I do not know. But at least in a lot of these cases, there's reason to believe that there's a lot more human element to this than a lot of people at these kind of conferences and the published books on it would want you to think. That's my personal belief on it. I can talk about it more with you later if you feel like it. So what Bennewitz did was he called up the Air Force and said, you know, you guys have some strange stuff going on over the base here. And he considered himself patriotic, wanted to let the Air Force know what was going on, that he could see it, and if they knew about it, if they were going to do anything about it, or if it was something that he shouldn't worry about. So he called up the Air Force. They put him in touch with a officer, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, AFOSI, that's what that means. Officer on the base, Richard Doty. Doty talked to him on the phone, actually went and visited him at Thunder Scientific and said, Bennewitz invited him to his house so he could show him more of the stuff, all the pictures he had been taking. He'd been making recordings of transmissions, he said, were from alien craft, and he was figuring out what the code was. So on October 24th of 1980, Doty and a physicist from Sandia Labs, that's Doty, about 3 years ago, made a visit to his house. And here's the report of the visit to his house. Actually, they visited on October 26th, 1980. Him and Jerry Miller, a chief scientific advisor for the Air Force Test and Evaluation Center, Curtin Air Force Base, interviewed Bennewitz at his home in the Fort Hill section of Albuquerque. Dr. Bennewitz produced photographs in over 2,600 feet of 8mm motion picture film depicting, he put on there, unidentified aerial objects flying over and around Manzano Weapons Storage Area and the Coyote Canyon Test Area, which I mentioned to you before, the whited out thing. He has been conducting independent research into aerial phenomena for the last 15 months. He also produced several electronic recording tapes, allegedly showing high periods of electrical magnetism being emitted from the Manzano Coyote Canyon area. Several photographs of objects, flying objects taken over general Albuquerque area. He has pieces of electronic surveillance equipment pointed at Manzano, very worrisome to them, and attempting to record high-frequency electrical beam pulses. He claims these aerial objects produce these pulses. Miller related the evidence clearly shows some kind of unidentified aerial objects were caught on film. No conclusions could be made. They hadn't told Doty what these things were yet. He was just going out to investigate the guy. Later he found out. They told him what it was so he wouldn't get confused. Miller, which is Gerald Miller, contacted Foreign Technology Division personnel at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, who expressed an interest and are scheduled to inspect Dr. Bennewitz's data, which I believe that they did. DCII is a background check on him to make sure he's not somebody that you keep an eye on for any other reason than this. HQCR 44 at that time referred to nuclear material, which is what was stored in Manzano. So they were very interested in him. They were so interested in him, on November 10th, they called him into the base and had him brief everybody of importance at the base. He was seeing, what he was doing, what he was finding. They wanted to know what he knew, without really letting him know that, what he was looking at. Because if they had something going on the base that anybody could just sit in their house and look at, they wanted to find out what could be looked at, and with a better intelligence out, because they didn't want this stuff. Read that through that for you, and you probably can't read it from back there. But anyway, the base commander was there, Jerry Miller was there, Doty was there, I believe. Heads of certain projects at the base were there. I was told by somebody who was had talked to somebody who was at the meeting that at the beginning of the meeting, there were about 20 people there, and at the end of the meeting, about 4 or 5. Because as people listened to him, they realized it had nothing to do with what they were trying to protect, so they just walked out of the meeting. They didn't care. They just said, this guy's nuts, doesn't concern me, I got other stuff to do. It's funny, at the end of the report, it said on the 26th of November, Doty received a phone call from an individual who identified himself as Senator Harrison Schmitt, because he had been writing letters to senators and congressmen about what he was seeing too. Kind of a worrisome thing to the Air Force. Because a lot of people in the government obviously don't know about a lot of these projects that are going on. Everybody here knows that, everybody's sitting in this room, otherwise you wouldn't be at this conference. Sometimes with good reason, oftentimes without.
Yes, we would. Oops.
Basically, he told Schmitt that it had nothing to do with UFOs and that he would look into it and make sure there wasn't anything amiss. Yeah, it said Dr. Bennewitz had it's funny they call him Dr. Bennewitz because he is never a doctor of anything. Somebody's told me that might be some indication that they were trying to falsify the document in some strange way by putting wrong information in it. Saying, well, this is wrong, so how can you trust the rest of it? These are documents were released to researchers in the mid-1980s. Yeah, they didn't really want the authorities to be concerned with what they were doing, and they certainly didn't want anybody that just could sit at the end of telescopes and certain recording devices to find out what they were doing, because this was all national defense. And I'll tell you a little bit about this in a while. I mentioned Bill Moore earlier. I met him in 1988 or 87. The next year he gave a speech at the Mutual UFO Network convention, and he told people the deal that he had made with these people in the Air Force. That's Bill from a couple years ago. That's not what he looked like in the late 1980s. I don't know where he got that shirt. The funny thing was that Bill Moore was not approached specifically. They didn't go to his door. The AFOSI did not go to his door and say, would you like to help us out? What they did was send out this letter, allegedly written by, well, actually written by somebody who was anonymous, but describing this man named Craig Weitzel, who was a Civil Air Patrol cadet, and describing something that he'd seen while on a patrol, training patrol around the Monsanto facility, saying that there was a large silver object flew over, landed on the ground, pictures were taken, etc. This letter was sent out to UFO researchers, UFO organizations. Actually, this says received by APRO July 1980. Actually, I don't know who wrote that note, probably Bill Moore. Anonymous, RE, government interference, and Men in Black, because there's actually a story at the end saying that he was visited by people dressed in black who confiscated his pictures. What this letter was a fishing expedition. They were trying to find out who in the UFO community, one, was interested in this, and two, most importantly, who would check it out. Bill Moore actually found this guy, Craig Weitzel, and he said, I didn't send that letter. I don't know who sent that letter. I did see something. It was very far away. It didn't land. I don't know what they're talking about. So obviously the thing was a fake, but somebody actually checked up on it. Most of the other researchers didn't check up on it. They just thought it was an interesting story and didn't really take it much further. In the summer of actually it was on July 2nd of 1989, Bill Moore came up on stage at the MUFON convention amidst a lot of rumor and speculation and suspicion, and described what had happened. He said that eventually, after he had checked up on this Weitzel letter, Richard Doty had contacted him and said, would you be interested in helping us out by telling us who in the UFO community is talking about certain things. He didn't want him to actually go to their houses, listen on the telephone calls or anything like that. They just wanted a general idea of what was going on in the community to see if it had any relationship to what they were doing. Counterintelligence, trying to keep the Soviets and other people from spying on places like Kirtland Air Force Base. A few people actually accepted this deal, and nobody else has talked about it so far. I have my suspicions, but it's not my business to go around spreading rumors, especially about people who are still alive. And if it's their business to say that they did the same thing, that's fine. Bill Moore actually admitted it. I remember being at that speech, and he had to stop about every 5 minutes because people were yelling at him. And the guy had to get up and say, "Let him say his piece," you know. I saw people, people walked out, women were crying. It was very dramatic. It's actually got me first interested in this episode. But he described what had happened, how it had happened, what he had done, and warned everybody about it, and saying, if somebody approaches you, be very careful about what they're saying and what they're telling you. Because in exchange for his part of the deal was he would get UFO documents, secret documents that nobody else had ever seen. And actually, you know what this is? This is he gave me a copy of the speech that he stood with there as those people were yelling at him and throwing things or whatever. And it's very interesting to see the things he kind of changed, like friends and enemies to friends and adversaries. This is a weird one, and I asked him about this. I believe we are very near to getting the answers we all claim to want. Sounds like a disclosure thing, doesn't it? Nature of these answers turns out to be such that they will change our world, and I need not point out that individual lives will be changed as well. It's important to know where we all stand. I asked him why he put that in there and why he took it out, and he said, in all honesty, I do not know. He said, I don't know why I said that. Maybe somebody told me to say it. I have no idea, but I took it out because I didn't think it was going to happen. And it hasn't, and I think he's still right. It still hasn't happened, no matter what people say. That's not in the scope of my talk, though. Oh, I just wanted to show you that he described what had happened to Paul Bennewitz, how he'd interacted with Paul, and why the Air Force was interested in what he was doing. Basically, it was kind of a mea culpa, saying, I did this, I'm admitting it to you now, and nobody told me not to talk about it, so I'm talking about it now. People got very angry at him for it, saying that he had been working for the government and that he was, an enemy of ufology, when in fact, he was one of their best friends for telling them what had happened and what to watch out for in the future. This still goes on. What did he get in return? Well, the first thing he got was funny. The Weitzel letter came out. He checked that out, said this is a fake, and said so. So he was called in to meet with a guy with Richard Doty. Is this confusing to you? Are you kind of following it? Okay. He was called in to meet with Richard Doty and a guy who came to be known as Falcon, who actually worked in counterintelligence, actually for the CIA, which I did not say in the book, but I know that now. And the identity of this man will be revealed in a few months here because I'm working on an article. But they went to a restaurant in Albuquerque, very cloak and dagger. The guy said, I will be wearing a red tie. Bill got there early and was sitting in a car, kind of watching the restaurant to see him walk in. He's sitting in the driver's seat looking this way at the restaurant, and he hears tap, 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 tap on the window, and he looks around and there's a red tie hanging in front of him. He opened the window and the guy said, are you waiting for me? And they went in the restaurant together. But, they offered him this deal, which I told you about, summer of 1980, and handed him this. He said he remembered, but he took a manila envelope and slid it across this tablecloth to him. Said, check this out. What it was a document describing something that's with a bunch of things saying secret and restricted and all uncrossed out. Describing an operation called Silver Sky, which sounds very dramatic and wonderful. What it described was a mass or a group of sightings in southern New Mexico in the 1960s, and provided names and places of residence. Bill said thank you. Went down to southern New Mexico and started going to all these. Actually, a few of them are in Roswell. A few of these addresses. People's names and where they live, what towns. He said he went down and started checking post offices, and he said none of these people lived in those towns. He said a couple of them lived in the town, but had not lived in the town when this was supposed to have happened, and the rest of them never even lived there, and they've never heard of them. So obviously this was a fake too. So he goes back to this guy Falcon next time with Doty, and he says, what are you guys trying to pull on me? This thing is totally fake. I mean, it looks wonderful, but it's completely fake. And he said that Doty and Falcon both smiled and said, "You passed the test, now we can go on." They wanted to find somebody that didn't just swallow stuff whole and say, this is what it is. I mean, people, UFO researchers, a lot of the time they will get something from a government person saying, you know, I'm going to tell you the secret and give you this and that. And they don't really critically examine what is given to them. And if somebody wants to spread stories, disinformation, it's very easy. Just find somebody that'll believe anything that's told to them as long as it flatters their prejudices. This is what I said about finding out things that are true and things that are not, and what to listen to, what to not. You use your mind, and before you make up your mind, before you make up your opinion about things, get as much information as you can. And if you don't have enough, who cares if you don't have an opinion? You're still learning about it. Anyway, this is the attitude Bill Moore took, and they said he passed the test. So, can anybody remember when the MJ-12 stuff was mailed to Jamie Chandray? 84?
December of 84.
I think it was 84, 83. Yeah. Is it 84? Yeah. Bill was working with his TV producer, Jamie Chandray, in Los Angeles. They were going to work on a project together. It didn't work out, but they started hanging out, thinking about doing a TV or movie project based on UFO stuff. Bill had written the Roswell Incident, the first book on the Roswell Incident, which came out in 1980, actually. After he had written the Philadelphia Experiment, which was the first book on that. You probably know about that. So he was working with this guy Chandray, and in 1984, Chandray went to open his door in his house in Glendale to pick up the mail, and he looked down, and there was a big manila envelope sitting in between the screen door and the front door. But it had been mailed from Albuquerque. Other than that, there was no return address, I don't think. And also, it looked at it like it hadn't come through the U.S. mail. Somebody had couriered it there, I believe. At least this is what I remember him telling me, Bill telling me. What was in there was a roll of 35 millimeter film with something that everybody knows about now, the Eisenhower briefing document, which was described a group that supposedly had control over the UFO subject, how it was dealt with by the government, and how the public was dealt with concerning the subject matter. Most people here know all about this document and named the people who were part of MJ-12, and for a long time, Bill Moore and a few other people believed that it was true. Actually, Bill didn't. He went and checked it out, and he said some of these people check out, some of them I'm sure of. Stanton Friedman took it a lot further, and his research is much more detailed than I have done, so I'm not going to argue with people that believe it's real or not. I asked Bill, and he said, you know what, now I think it's probably, at least his opinion in the last couple of years, is it's probably mostly disinformation. I think there was an MJ-12, but past that, I have no idea what they did. And this is coming from the person that got the MJ-12 documents in the first place. So that question's open. But this was the thing in ufology at the time when they introduced it in 1987, I believe, at a convention in Burbank, California. They said this is, we believe, is some sort of proof that the U.S. government knows what UFOs are. I've been dealing with it since at least 1947, and these people may have been responsible. From that agreement he made with them, the MJ-12 documents came out, and all the stuff that's come after that. This was the genesis of it. You know what's funny is Bill gave me this while I was writing the book, just to show you. I put it out on the bedspread, but it's this piece of paper that's all folded like this. I said, "Where'd you get this from?" And he said, "I think Falcon handed it to me." And I will preface this by saying he got this in, I believe, 82 or 83. What it is, it's a map of Area 51. 10 years before, or 12 years before anybody even cared about it. And and I said, "Bill, did you write these on?" He said, "No, I did not." He described to me this thing called the Groom Lake facility. He said that everybody thinks it's called S4, but apparently that's an area, at least he was told that's an area inside Area 51 called S4. And then something that was euphemistically called Saucer Mesa, which is where these things were tested. Once again, I don't know why he was handed this, and he said there was no way for me to prove any of this, so I just put it away. I just thought it was something interesting that was handed to me. Now, still, I don't know what it proves, but it does prove that way back in 1983 or 4, somebody was interested in telling UFO researchers there was something strange going on in southern Nevada here at this Area 51 place. So these things, what I'm talking about here has roots way back before anybody cared. And it's really strange to see some of the stuff that he got in exchange for this keep an eye on people deal. This actually is an example of a printout. This is a copy of a printout that Paul Bennewitz had. Remember I said these coded messages he was getting? He wrote a computer program to try and decode some of these messages. They were just short bursts of information. It was like there was a carrier wave, then kind of a and in these short bursts was all this stuff. The thing is that Bennewitz thought it was coming from aliens, and since he made the program, he was getting little bits and pieces of information. The thing was that in about 1983 or so, or maybe it was 82, early on, somebody showed up at his door and said, and since he trusted the Air Force, they handed him a computer and said, why don't you use this one? And of course, they had pre-programmed the computer to spit out exactly what they wanted him to see. And it was stuff like this. What? We women do not marry, realize we are not unity, we are separate, victory, grow, have no obligation to keep secret, now oxygen. Just gibberish like this, translating nothing. And the funny thing is after a while they set up in a house across the street from Paul Bennewitz and started beaming stuff into his equipment from right across the street. So he wouldn't be receiving anything from the base because the strong signal would be coming, 50 feet across there, 100 feet across the street right into his receiving apparatus. And I asked Bill, I said, what was, and a few other people, they all told me the same thing, what was his house like? And he said, you'd go up to his bedroom and his den, and the entire thing was filled with electronic equipment, floor to ceiling, and recording tapes going, oscilloscopes running, and
Sounds like the Lone Gunman.
yeah. But he had built all this stuff himself and was listening to all these things, and the Air Force was very worried about it. And people asked, well, why didn't they just tell him to cut it out? Tell him, this is secret, don't worry about it, be a good citizen. He was in the Coast Guard. He had actually signed up to be in the Coast Guard when he was a teenager during World War II. They could have just appealed to his patriotism and said, cut it out. This is not something you should be worrying about. But the thing was, they wanted to find out, much more valuable to them is they wanted to find out what he knew, how he knew it, who he was talking to, and who might be listening in. That was much more fruitful than telling somebody just cut it out. I don't know if I agree with that in light of what happened later, which I will talk about. But that's there was a review, I think, on Amazon saying, why didn't he ever say he didn't just tell Bennewitz to shut up? And it's like, well, I mentioned like 3 different times in the book, if you look on page, X, X, and X. But that was the reason. Sounds like good reasoning. It's spy reasoning. Makes sense. Another thing was they knew his interest in the Dulce area and this place called the Archuleta Mesa up there. And they reinforced his belief that there was some kind of activity going on up there with the cattle mutilations, the strange lights, what Myrna Hansen had said, by telling him there was an underground base there. Here's more Google Earth stuff, which I have now found very, very useful when trying to see where things are in relation to each other. What they told him was, he called up the Air Force and said, what's going on here up in Dulce? And they talked about it for a while, I think, and said, well, you know what, it's going to take his attention away from the base. Let's tell him all kinds of stuff is going on up there, and we know about it. I was there this year working on a documentary based in a great part on Project Beta. It's called Mirage Men. It'll be out early next year.
You know that's in Hunt for the Skinwalkers, too.
It's what?
It's in Hunt for the Skinwalkers.
What is?
Dulce.
What do they say about it?
They say it's a place of high strangeness.
Yeah, well, it is. All kinds of strange things going on with the cattle and lights flying in over these mountains and other things, poltergeist-like activity in people's houses.
Yeah,
I'm not saying nothing was going on there. I'm saying it was a good place to point somebody.
yeah,
Because
it's in the book.
okay, Yeah, when you go on Amazon, it tells them to buy it. It tells you to buy it with my book. Maybe I should buy it. I'd like to read it.
You should contact the author. He doesn't know about the Air Force part.
Really, Colm Keller?
Whoever wrote Skinwalkers.
I think it's Colm Keller.
He doesn't know about the Air Force part that you just described.
Oh, well, he should.
Wow.
I will.
Co-authored with George Knapp, who I assume does.
Yeah. Anyway, I'd been to Dulce. Actually, when the rumors were first going around, before I even knew about any of this or Bennewitz or anything, I went up there just to see what was going on and drive around, and I got freaked out and left for no good reason. And I only had a little bit of time there, and I was like 18 years old or something, or 19. There's Dulce. This entire area is the Hickory Apache tribal land. This is the Archuleta Mesa, that thing that I just showed you. Well, you saw it. It was taken from like down in here somewhere, but that where those trees were like down in here, and those rocks you see, that rock face is just this rock face that goes all the way back here. This actually is Colorado back here. It's very close to the Colorado border. One thing the Air Force did, which I describe in the book, is that they called up the Army Special Forces people at Fort Collins, I believe it is, and told them, we know that you used to perform search and rescue and training down in here. We'll give you a certain amount of money to step up that training again. We under a counterintelligence budget. So what they did is they started flying helicopters in, doing all these weird things, doing training exercises, going in at night, adding to all the confusion and weirdness that was going on there. The other thing they did was they took Paul, not once but twice, in a helicopter from Kirtland Air Force Base and flew him all the way up to Dulce, but not before they had put a bunch of junk up on top of the mesa right here, flying him just high enough so he couldn't see what was going on, but they had put, storage tanks, sheds, pieces of garbage, everything up there, and told him, I think there is something going on here, Paul. Why don't you check it out? And then, of course, later he went up there with his plane and they had taken some of it out. But, it planted the idea in his mind that there really was something going on up there. I don't know why he didn't just say, well, why don't you gone down and checked it out? Maybe he did and they lied to him about it. I don't know. But what they were trying to do was get him on their wavelength and in their control so that they could control not only what he was seeing, what he was believing, but keep track of who might be listening to him and who might be talking to him. Because they knew he wasn't wittingly doing anything to compromise security, but because of his actions and his personality and what he was doing, he was compromising security. They flew him up here and over here, and people said, well, how do you know he did that? The only person that told you was Richard Doty. No, actually a couple of researchers told me. I said, did you hear about Paul doing anything with a helicopter? They said, yeah, he was real excited about it at the time. He thought, this is it, the Air Force really believes me. And I asked Doty, I said, why did he believe everything that you told him? He said, I don't know. He just believed us hook, line, and sinker, completely. We could tell him whatever we wanted, and if we thought that there was a certain area that he should be steered towards, we would push that, and he would go there. He was a perfectly suggestible because he trusted them completely. That's just a closer shot of it. I think where they put the stuff was up in this area. And then took it out later. People come to me telling me that, oh, well, we've seen things there's vents and things coming up out of the mountain that indicates there's something underneath. I said, have you seen it? No. I said, well, how do you know? Well, I heard from a guy, or I read it in a book. I said, then you believe it. And the one guy he said, yeah, I'd stake my life on it. I said, you haven't seen it personally? You'd stake your life on it? I said, what did he say about these vents coming out of the ground? Did he put his hand over to see if there's any air going in and out of it? No. I said, well, how can you believe something so wholeheartedly when you have not seen it for yourself? Something so incredibly, outlandish. It could be true. I don't know, but I haven't, it's not up to me to prove a negative, I don't think it's there. What am I supposed to do, prove it's not there? Yeah, I can prove it's not there. It's not there. You go find me proof that there was something there. The funny thing is one person I talked to for this, who's familiar with the Dulce area, told me that he actually found out that there was something up there, and at some point I'm going to go up there with him and check it out. And I'm going to walk up there and see this thing opening in the side of the mountain and look like an idiot, but I'll change my opinion. My opinion will change radically, and next time I'll be here, you know, pounding the podium and yelling and maybe.
Just be careful who you go with.
Yeah. Well, we would have to get permission from the tribe. They will not let anybody on that mountain anymore. They just got tired of people coming up there and bothering them. I just told a funny story last night because the ABC or somebody came out there last year and did a documentary and told them they were going to do a documentary on the weird things going on there. The tribe said, well, okay. And they actually, and somehow they did something that really angered the leadership of the tribe there. And they said, that's it, no more media here anymore. We don't want to talk about it, we don't want to deal with it, leave us alone. And I went there about 4 months ago, and I went in the gift store. You know, and they had, you know, Hickorea tribe, they had t-shirts and stuff. And way up in the corner, there was a black t-shirt that said, I got probed in Dulce, and all I got was this stupid t-shirt. Which I thought was very strange if they're trying to downplay what's going on there. Of course I bought one. I had to. What are there, like 5 people that are going to get that joke? Soon after this, after he'd been flown up there, so I guess it was around early 1981, he took everything that had been going on and his recording of these signals, what he thought the aliens were saying. He thought they were talking to him specifically and telling him what they were doing, while trying to fool him into thinking it was okay when he thought they were going to take over the planet or it was some invasion. He even went so far as to put together some kind of weapon, he said, that could take the flying saucers down. Kind of sounds like Wilhelm Reich, if you know about that story. He took all this information and released this thing he called Project Beta. I don't know if there's a Project Alpha, maybe there was, hence the name of the book. He talks about encounter victim in New Mexico and Myrna Hansen. He talks about established direct communications with the alien. He didn't call them the aliens. Using computer and form of hexadecimal code with graphics and printout. True underground base location was divulged. Subsequent aerial and ground photo. So all this stuff was being directed towards Bennewitz to make him believe this stuff. Just to keep him running like a robot so they could track him and what he was doing and how he's finding out what he was finding out. And who he was attracting in the UFO community, because he was doing that too. And what they wanted to know. Because a lot of people in the UFO, well, not a lot. A few of the people in the UFO community at the time were not interested in UFOs. They were interested in the national defense of the United States. Just happens that a lot of UFO sightings and things like that happen around Air Force bases. You think people sitting in Area 51, every one of them were a bunch of UFO researchers. A lot of them were people from other countries with big cameras taking pictures of what was going on there. Flying saucers or not, they don't like that. This is actually one of the things he received on his on that computer printout, specifically dealing with Dulce and Archuleta Peak area. Actually, he said that these were from some good aliens telling him how to defeat the bad aliens and how to get up the peak and where to go. This is what he was able to figure out from the transmission. And these are his translations of what was going on. Just to show you how involved it was getting. And the wealth of incredibly weird stuff I had to go through looking at and doing stuff for this book, and how crazy it did get. Maybe I'm nuts and this actually was true, but the thing is, no aliens ever invaded, nobody's ever found a base under Dulce, and people have told me on both sides of the issue, insiders and ufologists, researchers have given me perfectly reasonable explanations for all this crazy stuff. So, you know, what are you going to believe? Totally outlandish, crazy stuff that you can't prove, or things that seem to have a very mundane explanation but are a good lesson for anybody that's looking at this kind of information. This stuff, Serpo, which everybody knows about, involving a lot of the same people that were involved with Paul Bennewitz. Everybody said, well, why do you think it's disinformation? It's like, the same names are coming up. What do you think they're doing this time? It's certainly not telling us about a bunch of people that went to a planet in the 1970s for 13 years and came, you know. I don't know if that's a true story or not, but that's not why that story was not put out to let us believe that that's actually happened. It was put out for another reason, which I have not been able to figure out. Might have been passing messages back and forth.
Sounds like from a beautiful mind.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of. I just put them together, you know, den under Archuleta Peak. What does that say? The base area is referenced as the dam and by the alien life forms. West of peak, snow gone, snow has melted. Anyway, he went point by point with this junk that was fed to him by the Air Force. Actually, I think this might have been NSA because they were in charge, National Security Agency, I'm sorry, in charge of the signals that were going on. It was a project to send coded messages. The reason they were worried about this is because somebody's sitting there in their house with a cheap computer that he built himself and a couple antennas was figuring out their code, which is why they steered him towards this stuff. He wasn't figuring it out very well, but he was getting a vague idea of what was going on, and that was very worrisome to them. In 1981, he started sending that copy of Project Beta and ever more impassioned letters to his senators, Domenici and Schmidt, and even to President Reagan at the time. The funny thing was, these people in government did not know what was going on, and they were saying, who is this crazy person that is writing to us with these crazy ideas with official names in there? Because he gave names of people on the base who had been telling him this stuff. You know, the head of security, etc., making it sound like it was officially sanctioned.
It was.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was officially sanctioned, but you know, Senator Domenici and Harrison Schmidt did not know this, so they had to explain to him what they were doing. I don't know if they approved of it or not, but basically they said it's counterintelligence. Don't worry about it. Ignore the guy. They did not tell Paul they were doing this, though, and he kept sending these letters. But he got more and more frustrated because nobody was listening to him when the officials were telling him that what he was doing was important. The people he trusted most. This I found out last year when I was doing some more research on the book. Howard Burgess was a scientist that was working for the Air Force at the time. Actually, Howard Burgess is an interesting character. He did an experiment where he took some of these cattle that had been, cattle from the same herd that had been found mutilated, and they ran them through a squeeze chute under different wavelengths of light. And under the UV light, these big splotches appeared on the backs of the cows, these big sparkly purple splotches. And they were cattle that were from the same lineage as the cattle that had been mutilated. And later, actually, one of the ones that had been marked ended up mutilated, and it made them think, there's aliens coming down there. Why do they have to mark cattle with UV in big, messy splotches? Like somebody had just flown over them or done something, just dropped this stuff on them. You couldn't see it in normal light, but under UV, it glowed purple, bluish, purplish. If you're flying around at night with a UV light, it's very easy to spot a cow that's marked like this. Which is another clue about something human going on, very, very human going on with the cattle mutilations, not an alien thing. At least in a majority of the cases. There might be some that are truly unexplainable. I do not know, but I know a lot of them are explainable. I believe they are. Anyway, Burgess began to tell, I guess, I don't know if this is true or not, but it's very interesting. Somebody started telling some of the scientists working at the lab that the Air Force was flying alien missions out of Kirtland using ET craft, which the aliens were teaching us to fly. This was in the 80s again. All this stuff about Project Snowbird and all this, and Area 51 that came out later, this stuff started back then in the early 1980s, and not at Area 51 at Kirtland. They were told the ET craft gave off a certain electromagnetic signature, which could be detected with simple electronic gear, like Paul Bennewitz had. But they weren't disinforming Paul Bennewitz at this point. They're disinforming their own scientists. Why were they doing this? And they would actually tell them when this was going to happen, and they'd pick up these electromagnetic pulses. Obviously, they didn't want a bunch of their scientists who weren't cleared for whatever it was to be looking into it. They just wanted to basically throw them off the trail and make them, who the hell, a respected scientist at this lab is going to say, hey, they're flying alien craft over whatever. Maybe it was a psychological test too, I don't know. Yeah, they would periodically called Howard, like I just said, Howard Burgess, and such a date. The signal would be detectable while the craft was operating south of Kirtland Air Force Base near Fort Hills, where Bennewitz lived. Sure enough, they picked up an unknown signal at that exact frequency on more than one occasion. Once, according to this other Sandia source, he and Howard stepped outside after detecting the signal and sighted an extremely bright light above or just behind Fort Hills. So something indeed was going on there. I don't know why they would disinform. Like I said, maybe it was a test with these people to figure out what they would do. You know, how much could they pump at these people? And you know, as long as they were doing it to a civilian, why don't they do it to some of their own people and see how they, you know, see how high they jump or where they jump. Totally unconfirmed story. I do not know. It would seem to make sense in light of what I just said. I keep looking at the time, but you know what? I'm the last talk, so I can talk as long as I want. Oh, well, within reason with the video. In February of 1981, Bill Moore was handed this thing, which came to be called the Aquarius document, and told to give it to Paul Bennewitz. A lot of people say, you know, think Moore was basically sitting there feeding stories to Paul Bennewitz and other UFO researchers, constantly saying, why don't you look into this? Why don't you, you know, that had been fed to him by the Air Force. And as far as I can tell, Bill has never lied to me. And there's stuff that he's told me that I've been able to find out years later is true. No way for me to know when he actually tells me the first time, but nothing he's ever told me has been false. And if he can't tell me something, he says, sorry, I was told that I was not allowed to talk about that, and he won't. Good enough for me. However, he was handed this in February of 1981 and told to give it to Bennewitz, because Bennewitz trusted Bill too, Bill Moore. They were actually friends. Bill would go over and eat at his house and all that. Not constantly, but they knew each other. They said, you know, Bill, he trusts you. Why don't you give him this? Don't tell him where you got it. Just tell him it's a trusted source and give him this. And Bill actually said he sat on it for about 4 or 5 months until Doty or somebody said, you know, you give him that document or the deal's off. So he actually went to, Paul handed it to him. And the funny thing was, I think I put it in the book, a very funny scene. I said, did you just hand it to him or what? He said, no. I told him, do you have a small room in your facility, like at Thunder Scientific? I'll meet you over there. They went into a closet, a very small closet, where nobody does very much talking anyway. So if there's a bug in the room, you know, who's going to bug a closet? They're going to bug the conference room or the meeting room or the front room or whatever. They went in the closet. They brought in a radio, and Bill said he took the radio and cranked it to full volume. Handed him the paper and went up to his ear as loud as he could so Paul could hear him, and said, I was told to give this to you. Take it with a grain of salt. Be very careful what you do with it. And he said Bennewitz understood, didn't question him at all, and he said he put it in his safe at the company and never talked about it. Bennewitz never said anything about this document. However, if he read the document, he would see that the film that he had been giving to the Air Force of what he had been filming over the base, according to this document, was taken very seriously, because what it is a description of bits of his film and still and movie film and what it was showing, purporting to come from a photo analysis center in, I believe it's Virginia. The funny thing is that, well, this just describes -1, -2 pieces of film. The funny thing about this was that Bill saw this on a screen in the Air Force AFOSI headquarters. This very same teletype type thing. He said he saw it coming down on a video screen, just a black and white screen. This was 1980 or 81, remember. And he said when he looked at it, he said I've seen this before. And Doty said, yes, you have. And he said, but this isn't what it said. He said it said something different than this. I said, do you remember what it said? And he said, no, but it was not what was on this piece of paper that I was told to hand to Paul. And there's a lot of very strange things in this document which you probably can't see. So I will describe them to you if I can read them. After the description of all these negatives and all this stuff, down here in February 1981, no dissemination outside official intelligence channels and with restricted access to MJ-12. This was before the Eisenhower briefing thing, was 3 years before it was sent. This MJ-12 thing was being planted in some, in researchers' minds in February of 1981. Somebody was thinking very thoroughly through this and saying, we're either going to create a story about MJ-12 or reveal what it is to certain degrees. But this is the earliest reference to something called MJ-12, which later, of course, like I described before, became the biggest thing in ufology. Is the biggest. Talked about Jerry Miller and Fugate. This guy, Robert Fugate, who was the head of the Starfire optical range, which I will get to. So, very strange little thing. Actually, people later thought Project Aquarius had something to do with communicating with aliens. And then what that came from was this document here, which says nothing about communicating with aliens. All it's talking about is Paul Bennewitz's film, and letting him, pushing this idea more to him that the Air Force is very interested in what he was doing and trying to figure out what it was. I'm sorry, it's all right.
I'm sorry. Very interesting, but we have to go, and I didn't want you to think that I wasn't interested.
Oh, okay.
We have an appointment, and we've got to go. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I didn't want to interrupt.
No problem.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hey, it's not even 6 yet. I had 2 hours. Oh, wait. That's all right.
Sorry.
6:15. No, thanks so much for coming. One of the pieces of, actually, I can't read it off because it's too small, but one of those descriptions of a negative actually sounds like it's describing this picture here. One of the things he sent to them, saying, these are, because they wanted all of his pictures. They wanted to see what he was taking pictures of. The reason I mentioned Miller, Jerry Miller, he told me not to use his name in the book, so I did not. And he is very hard to get in touch with, and none of you are going to be able to get in touch with him, and I can't anymore. So this is okay. I was looking around online after I finished the book, and on Bob and Ryan Wood's site, they're the people that basically have taken over the research of MJ-12, all the documents, trying to authenticate them. They had a list of things they had in their catalog, and one of them was Defense Intelligence Agency list of mission and key personnel, March 1981. Exactly the time I was interested in. I emailed or phoned Bob and I said, hey, Bob, do you have a copy that I could look at? And he sent me the original. I kept it for a while, and I looked through it very carefully. I showed it to Bill Moore, and I said, do you recognize any of these people, or any of these people, the Falcon that you're telling me about? Nope. But he said, it's very interesting to see this, because I can see where these people were working. And there's about, I don't know, it's about maybe 50 pages long, but there's all these different departments in the Defense Intelligence Agency. Just so I knew that Mr. Miller was not some crazy, person that they had put confirmed by this document. While I'm looking for this person who was Falcon, I see Mr. J.R. Miller, and then other people like Jack Verona, who you may know about, who was head of Scientific and Technical Intelligence, which some people think was the part of the DIA that was interested in UFOs. But under Weapons and Systems Division, we've got Mr. J.R. Miller. And this actually was his specialty, was missiles and guidance systems, things like that. In October of 1985, much to the chagrin of the Air Force, something that somebody was testing crashed on the Archuleta Mesa, which they were trying to draw his attention to. Unfortunately, his attention was drawn to it, and he was flying over the mesa a couple days after this thing crashed, apparently, and he started taking pictures of it. All of his pictures showing something that we would recognize as some kind of wreckage, he takes his house. People would come into his house all the time, and from the AFOSI, et cetera, CIA, and go through his stuff, and anything that was incriminating or important, they would just take. And he knew they were doing this. But strangely enough, it did not make him paranoid. They just thought, oh, this must be really important to them, so they came and took it. Very strange attitude. But they left these pictures. The only thing that he had left was these pictures showing really nothing. he said this is where something had crashed. The funny thing is that Gabe Valdez and the head of the Hickory Apache tribal police went up there with Paul Bennewitz later, probably about a month after this happened. And they basically actually did see a bunch of broken trees, disturbed ground, and something had indeed crashed there. He wasn't nuts, something had crashed. And then he said they found a pen that either said U.S. government or Sandia Labs on it. Somebody had forgotten to take that, they had dropped it. But what Paul thought it was, and what was encouraged by somebody, a letter writer, somebody on the inside that I will describe in a minute here, was that what had crashed was a alien craft that had been given to the United States government that humans were learning to fly. Where have we heard this story before? And this is one of his, he said this is a burn spot. It looks like a shadow of a tree to me, but he said it was an atomic powered anti-gravity type craft. Ground charred, apparent rocket engine. He said everybody that saw these pictures, the ones that showed nothing, obviously could not see what he said was there. Camouflage ship under ledge. Oh, great, it's camouflaged. Wow, how can you see it? Saucer apparently on guard. It looks like a tree. Anyway, crane above ship, black wedge. It just looks like a, whatever you want it to be in this kind of a picture, it's going to be. I wish that there were some of these pictures of whatever had crashed there. I don't think it was a joint human-operated, piloted alien craft. What I think it was, I'll get to in a minute. This is actually a letter from Paul Bennewitz to Moore describing what he had seen, that there was something there, that the aliens had given us this craft and it had crashed. They had made it crash as a lesson to us not to mess with them. The only thing we're left with is his drawings of what he thought he saw there. I think this drawing is actually in the book as one of the illustrations, describing what had happened. And the thing was, he didn't make this all up himself, and he kept changing what he thought the thing looked like, which is another strange thing. Probably after he got his pictures taken away from him, he's just trying to remember what he'd seen. Finally, he got to, that was his final, he said there were 2 crashes too, which actually was confirmed. There were 2 things that crashed there. Very busy place in late 1985. What I thought it was a crashed stealth fighter, which in 1985 was a big secret. And I'm still convinced that it may have been, or may have been one of the things that crashed. I mean, if you had never seen a stealth, and that's an early prototype of it. The other thing that was suggested to me was that it was a unmanned aerial vehicle, a UAV, as they're called now. They're not a secret anymore. Everybody knows that one was used to kill Al-Qaeda member in, where was it? Yemen, that's right. The CIA used it. But in 1985, this is a big secret. And if one of them crashed, they were going to go clean it up immediately. They didn't want anyone to know we're testing unmanned craft. I mean, there's nothing exotic about it except for that they were trying to make them silent, basically undetectable while they did their work. And if one of them crashed, they had to clean it up pretty quickly. I was just, looking around on the net thinking, this sort of looks like what Paul had drawn. I do not know. It's funny, I go up to El Mirage Dry Lake to go flying sometimes, and I see this thing flying over the lake all day, just circling around this actual craft, this Predator, which is, considering what was in Bennewitz's drawings, it could have either been this or the Stealth or both, I don't know. But whatever it was a big secret.
I think you got the same situation you had looking at the photographs. You could see anything you want to.
Yeah, exactly. But something definitely technological and that had some sort of malfunction had crashed, and they were. Whoever it was that was in charge of this was trying desperately to get Bennewitz to say something that nobody would listen to. Oh, it's an alien craft. Anybody that's taking anything seriously is not going to listen to that, which was fine with them. I do not know if it was the NSA or some other organization that was dealing with this crash The guy that was writing him these letters in late 1985 apparently was working with Lockheed. He was on the government end of it, and Lockheed was doing the hardware research. But he was actually assigned to encourage Paul to think that this was some sort of human-operated alien craft scenario. Something interesting is going on in the Dulce area. No positive or negative response to my query as to thermal or radioactive spots or areas. Yeah, they went up there with a Geiger counter and they actually couldn't find any radioactivity. Bennewitz was certain there was going to be radioactivity there, but there wasn't any. Didn't deter him though. He sent his photos to this guy. Basically, I wanted to show that there was a back and forth with this guy, and he basically pointed Bennewitz in the direction they wanted him pointed in. Then he started telling them stuff like this. A group of people revealed this to be the E-bands and originating from the green planet, created two races of mankind, Homo sapiens and, that's very funny, Swedes. Like Swedish, the guy can't spell or I don't know what's going on there. Very similar external appearance, mental compositions, Homo sapiens tending more towards emotion and Swedes tending more towards pragmatism. Anyway, he started telling him these stories about how the aliens had, basically come to Earth, invented us, put Jesus in there to keep us in line, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But this stuff started way back in 1985 with Bennewitz. And, if you know anything about ufology in the late 80s and early 90s and all the way through, this stuff got crazier and crazier and crazier and crazier. It's supported by people like this, who were bleeding and leaking information to people. In 1989, actually, at that MUFON convention, there was a separate convention of people that were all into this stuff, saying that they knew what was going on, and they said, we're not going to stand for this convention. We have to tell people what's going on because of our inside sources, who are the same people that were talking to Bennewitz. John Lear, Bill English, people like that. Actually, John Lear contacted Bennewitz very early on and was very interested in his information. And at some point, he did something that angered Paul, and he wouldn't talk to him anymore. But apparently, somebody or some people in the government took up the cudgels and led Lear on. And then he was on our bell all the time, and et cetera, et cetera. You know the story. That's why part of the title of the book is The Creation of a Modern UFO Myth. Some people say the, and I get very irritated because it's about part of what's going on, not the. I don't think the modern ideas about UFOs are a myth, or I think part of it is, and this is the part I'm talking about. Yeah, just to show you a little bit more of these crazy things this guy was talking about. Actually, this is about the Roswell crash. In a remote area near Roswell, New Mexico, 2 Swede aircraft crashed. Swede. One ship was totally destroyed with the debris scattered over a large area. The other ship, although severely damaged, maintained sufficient structural integrity to enable one crewman named EDE. I don't know what happened to EBE, extraterrestrial biological entity. But anyway, this does not mean that the Roswell incident is disproved by somebody saying something like this. It just means he's using a story that somebody knows about, that's been in Bill Moore's book, at least up to that point, to hammer home the point that there are aliens here and Paul knows all about it, and it's a good thing that he's helping them out. Other stuff like Project Sigma, that people like Lear and Bill Cooper and all that talked about, this was all buzzed to Paul Bennewitz in 1985. This is talking about the Archuleta crash. They learned of our duplicity and destroyed the 2 ships as their final approach to the Dulce base. Just to show you that this is not some isolated thing, the guy who was writing to, his name was Ron, and I'm just showing you that he's Paul and this guy wrote back and forth. Paul, and it's funny because Paul said, I don't know if I can believe this, but this sounds exactly what we were talking about before. And there was a give and take between them. Just to show you, somebody was there still in 1985 trying to direct his attention to certain things. And there's an answer back to that last letter. More stuff about the E-bands and the Swedes and all that. I think this was a draft before it was sent to Paul that was given to me, because look what they're trying to do with this. Oh, there's another one, the krills. That's something that, that Bill Cooper was very into.
The what?
Krills, K-I-R-L-S. Oh, remember that strange alien whose supposed name was O.H. Krill?
Yes.
K-R-I-L-L. Very strange that this guy is using this. He says that's another race of the aliens. But they're trying to start this thing about Las Vegas and Area 51 and all that, and maybe draw people's attention over in that direction, use the same story about Dulce and move it over to Area 51. Enough of the bullshit. What were they so concerned about? What were they trying to cover up? That was something I wanted to find out for the book. Why were they so concerned about Paul Bennewitz? What were they testing there? I did not find out everything. However, I did find out that, like I mentioned before, what these things were probably unmanned aerial vehicles being used for surveillance. I don't know why they lit up like that. I'm sure we do not know the extent of unmanned aerial vehicle development, even now. Certainly not back then. Nobody even thought of that. And basically, they're model airplanes. But who thought the military would be flying model airplanes with cameras in them? Here, you know, they want us to see big jets flying by and all that, and helicopters coming down and strafing people, not little tiny model airplanes with cameras in them.
The Air Force would largely agree with you. The pilots don't like the idea.
Yeah, yeah, but intelligence loves the idea. Intelligence is very intelligent in spite of what people think. It's like, you know, they always have this idea that there's bumbling intelligence agents. There are very sharp people involved in that, and if there weren't, history might be a little bit different or a lot different now. There's very sharp people in intelligence on every side. That's why they're in intelligence. They're supposed to fight wars before they happen. I think it's a good idea. I don't like the way they do it a lot of the time. You know, about absolute power corrupting absolutely, but I think, you know, people say, well, let's get rid of the intelligence. They do so many terrible things. They also do good things, keeping us from getting in wars. They fight the war before it happens. That's what they're supposed to do. That's what a lot of them think they are doing. But the people above them may not have that idea. More powerful. That may be a naive view, but it's the one I hold right now. Keeps me from getting paranoid. And talking to some of these people, I realized, you know, we were just doing our job. We want to do it a certain way. We want to do, like, you know, well, why'd you let them go nuts? Well, you know, we just thought it was very important not to let things get to the point where people we didn't, the bad guys, to find out. Probably we shouldn't have done it that way. I was like, well, you're damn straight, of course. What I thought for a while that they were trying to cover up was this thing, which is huge. It's called the Trestle. It's on Kirtland Air Force Base. If you fly in from the north, actually even from the south, into the airport, you can see this thing. It's still the largest wooden structure in the world, and it was made without metal fasteners because what it does is pulses. Electromagnetic pulses, it shoots them through aircraft to make sure that if there's a nuclear explosion, which produces a huge electromagnetic pulse, does not knock out their radar, their radio, all that other stuff. They use it to find out if it's shielded well enough. What they found out that they couldn't produce enough power to even approach what a nuclear explosion would do. I don't know why they built this huge thing to be able to find that out, but they used to, you know, roll like C-150 for very large transport planes out. Like a 747 would go about from there to there, and it's this long. So I thought that might have been the source of the pulses, but that doesn't make any sense because there's information in them. Just big, fat, powerful electromagnetic pulses are not going to contain information. These were very specific, very precise transmissions. However, what I did find out was very interesting, and a very interesting story was that I was driving on the base with Jerry Miller, and I said, "What were they saying? What were they trying to cover up? Why was Bennewitz so important?" I don't know. There was a lot of stuff going on at the base. You know, I didn't know about everything, and I know for a fact he knew about a lot of things that were going on there. He was being coy with me. He's an intelligence. I mean, he was a smart guy. He was a scientist. He's involved in very, very secret projects, and. If you meet people that are in that spook world, they have a very strange way of dealing with you. If they want to help you, they're not going to answer you straight out. The next day, we're having lunch. Or no, I asked him that the day before when we were having dinner. Then we were driving around on the base. He said, "You know about this guy, Robert Fugate?" I said, "Yeah, I've heard of him. He used to run the Starfire. I think he still does. He's in his 70s now. The optical range, which looks like an observatory. And it is an observatory, but they're not looking at stars and planets. They're looking at things flying over the base that are made by people. They're looking at satellites, among other things." There's Robert Fugate. And Jerry says, do you know what he did? He invented the system so you could look into space and not have to worry about the atmosphere, because that's why stars twinkle, because of the air currents. It's like looking through, 30-something feet of water. He invented this system whereby there was a mirror in a telescope, and the mirror was deformable. It was a very shiny surface, but underneath it, it had plungers operated by hydraulics. And what they did was they looked at the atmosphere and they would bend the mirror in exactly the opposite direction that the atmosphere was distorting what they were looking at. Absolutely brilliant thing. And what happened, that's kind of a schematic of what it looks like. It's called adaptive optics, AOS. There was I said they would look at the way the atmosphere was disturbing whatever they were looking at, and this mirror would bend exactly to counteract that and send that to where they wanted their real image.
Yeah, there's a laser involved usually.
Yeah, at first there wasn't, though. Then they found out that if they shined a laser into the atmosphere, they didn't have to sight it, because they used to sight it on a star, and they would be stuck to that star as it rotated over the Earth. But when they shot a laser into space and looked how it was deforming the laser, they could point it anywhere they want, at the speed they wanted, because they were sighting on something that originated with them. That's a picture of a satellite. I just got this off a website. Taken with no adaptive optics. That's with it. And then they used, Air Force version of Photoshop and come up with that. This way they could identify which spy satellites were coming over the base. Obviously they did not want the Russians to know that they were doing this, because they would communicate with the satellites by laser light. Not with electromagnetic waves, not with radio waves. The Russians had invented some way to just sit there and pulse laser light and use that as the information conduit to control the satellite and downlink, uplink, all that information to it. Late 70s. Amazing stuff. That's a picture of now it's being used in astronomy. And this was the late 70s. Nobody knew about it till around the mid-90s or so, 10 to 20 years behind. I'm talking about. So they did not want Bennewitz to know about this, obviously, because somebody had gone to Russia, they'd put people in there, and they'd figured out how these things worked, so they could send that information back and have them control these satellites with laser pulses. Very important operation. So this is what was going on. They didn't want, because if somebody found out that they knew what was going on with these satellites, there's a bunch of people in Russia that have probably been jailed or killed or worse. So it was very important to them to keep this secret.
Wasn't Kirtland heavily